ask you about the breaking news this morning that former Vice President Dick Cheney has passed away. I know that you wrote a book on Cheney called Cheney One-on-One. I know you had a 10-hour-long conversation with him in that time period. Can you just elaborate a little bit with us about what Dick Cheney's legacy will be?
Well, thanks for asking, Charlotte. Of course, we're obligated first to express our condolences to the Cheney family. In fact, this is a little-known fact, but the actual pronunciation of the family name was Cheney, but they gave up policing that a long time ago, and they just accepted the pronunciation of Cheney. You're correct. I published a book 10 years ago called Cheney One-on-One, and this was a collection of transcripts of 10 hours of oral history interviews that I conducted with the former vice president at his home in McLean, Virginia in late 2014 over a 3-day span. So 10 hours over 3 days. We had agreed to do 6 hours, 2 hours a day. Dick Cheney was not one to waste words, as you'll recall. And the fact that he extended the sessions from 6 to 10 hours, I think, showed that he thought it was a worthwhile enterprise. We covered his entire life. I had known him. I had traveled with him a couple different times. We did 10 countries in 8 days, I think, in the Middle East in 2002 together. Then again in 2005, I went to Iraq with him. He had a dry wit. He was as advertised. He could be impressive. He could be laconic, which is to say not speak very many words, and there was a certain intimidating presence to him. One of the things I found most fascinating about our interviews, the 10 hours we spent together in 2014, of course we talked about 9/11. Of course we talked about Iraq, where he did admit mistakes were made. Where the intelligence on the Iraq war was concerned, Cheney was very steadfast in running me down through many documents that he had brought with him to his own living room for this purpose, to show how widespread was the conclusion in the intelligence community, not only in the United States, but also overseas in British intelligence services, for example, that Saddam Hussein was stockpiling WMD. I will say one last thing about him. There was, as of yesterday, or when he died, at the time that he died, there was no one else alive on planet Earth who had had a cardiac event in the 1970s and who was still here to tell you about it, except Dick Cheney. And lastly, I think it's fair to say that there was no one in American political history who consumed classified U.S. intelligence product over a longer span of time than Dick Cheney, starting from when he was Deputy Chief of Staff in the Ford White House in 1974, all the way through Inauguration Day 2009.
Yeah, James, obviously I worked for one of his successors as vice president. I think he actually rewrote the book in terms of becoming a powerful vice president in no way that we had seen prior to that, and everyone modeled it after the fact.
He was, no question, the most influential vice president in U.S. history. Of course, that's not the same as saying that he exercised some sort of Svengali powers over George W. Bush. He did not. Theirs was a true collaboration. On 9/11, all of us have our 9/11 stories. Where were we when we heard the news? Whether you were in New York, for example, only one American has as his 9/11 experience. It was my job to be in the Presidential Emergency Operations Center bunker beneath the White House and running the federal government while the president was hopscotching around the country on Air Force One, and that was Dick Cheney. And the photographs that were released by the National Archives many years later that were taken in that bunker on 9/11, they're almost like a Renaissance painting where Dick Cheney's sitting at the center of the table. And you have very powerful people such as the White House National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, the presidential advisor from Texas, Karen Hughes, who was very tight with George W. Bush. All are leaning in toward Dick Cheney, who's sort of the big daddy figure, who was the one taking all the planes out of the sky, ordering the FAA to do that, who was the one ordering the Defense Department to shoot down that fourth plane if it strayed into Washington airspace. He was a remarkable figure, and he had great influence in a number of different eras.
Information. Truth is freedom. Is Newsmax. It's real news for real people.